the fire engine had to stop 80 feet short of the gate because the only emergency road out of our hillside neighborhood had been turned into guest parking. There were 13 SUVs, 2 pickup trucks, a white Mercedes parked halfway over the shoulder, and a row of concrete blocks painted the color of sand. Above them was a polished metal sign that read, "Clubhouse Guest. Parking reserved." The brush fire was still below the ridge then, moving through dry grass and low chaparral, less than half a mile from our homes. You could see smoke folding over the canyon. You could hear sirens coming from every direction. And standing beside that blocked road, with ash already blowing across the pavement, I watched a firefighter walk from vehicle to vehicle asking people to move. Most of them weren't even residents. They were guests at the new clubhouse preview event. The HOA had spent 2 years building that clubhouse. They called it the Future of Canyon Crest Estates, a premium foothill lifestyle community near Santa Clarita. The board wanted weddings, holiday parties, real estate mixers, and private events. They wanted the clubhouse to look busy, successful, expensive. What they didn't want was an ugly, wide emergency road running behind it. So they narrowed it. They installed a gate. They put up reserved parking signs. They set concrete blocks along both sides to guide guests into marked spaces. And when fire season finally reminded everyone why that road existed, the HOA president told us it was only a temporary parking arrangement. That temporary arrangement nearly left our entire West Ridge with one way out. My name is Anna Morales. I live in Canyon Crest Estates with my husband, Miguel, and our 16-year-old daughter, Camila. We moved here 9 years ago because Miguel loved the foothills and I loved the view. From our back patio, on a clear day, you can see the hills rolling north toward Castaic. In spring, they're green. In late summer, they turn the same dry gold as everything else around Santa Clarita. Beautiful place. Fire country. Everybody who buys here knows that, or at least they should. Canyon Crest was built in phases starting in the late 1990s. The developer carved homes into the hillsides, added a small park, built a clubhouse lot at the entrance, and created 2 ways in and out of the western side of the community. The main entrance was through Canyon Crest Drive. The second route was called West Ridge Fire Access Road. Nobody used it for daily traffic. It wasn't a shortcut to the grocery store. It wasn't a scenic lane. It was a paved, all-weather emergency access road that curved behind the clubhouse, crossed the western ridge, and connected to a service street near the back of the community. For most of the year, it sat quiet behind a locked emergency gate, but it had to remain clear. The road was just over 20 feet wide. It had reflective markers, a turnaround area, and a red-painted curb zone at the clubhouse end. The original development plans labeled it Fire Apparatus Access, Secondary Emergency Egress. That wording mattered. Not overflow parking. Not temporary guest staging. Not land available for HOA events. Emergency egress. For years, the road stayed exactly as it was supposed to be. The HOA landscape crew sometimes used it to reach the backside of the slopes. Fire crews inspected it before severe fire weather periods. Once every few months, someone would complain that the gate looked rusty or that the weeds along the shoulder needed trimming. That was about it. Then the board decided the old clubhouse was too small. The president at the time was Randall Voss. Randall was a former commercial real estate broker in his early 60s. He wore loafers without socks, talked about amenity value, and had a habit of calling every criticism resistance to progress. He had moved into Canyon Crest 3 years before we did. By the time I joined the architectural committee, he was already president. Randall wasn't loud in the obvious way. He didn't pound tables. He didn't insult people in public. He was more polished than that. He would say things like, "We should avoid letting outdated infrastructure dictate the future of our community." What he meant was that anything standing in the way of his clubhouse project had become outdated. The proposal began with a simple renovation: new flooring, expanded kitchen, updated restrooms, a bigger patio. Then it became a full redesign. The board approved an event room, a stone terrace, a catering entrance, landscape lighting, and a new parking area for guests. The construction budget climbed from $410,000 to almost $1. 3 millions. At the annual meeting, several homeowners asked where all the extra cars would go during large events. Randall smiled and said the HOA had identified ample capacity within existing common area circulation. That phrase sounded professional. Nobody knew at the time that existing common area circulation meant the fire road. The first sign of trouble came during construction. I was walking Camila's dog one Saturday morning when I saw a landscaping crew painting lines on the pavement behind the clubhouse. White lines, angle, too narrow for regular traffic but perfect for parking stalls. At first, I thought they were painting a loading area. Then I saw the small signs stacked near the gate. Guest parking. I took a photo. The next HOA meeting was 3 days later. I brought the photo with me. Randall was seated at the front table with the treasurer, the community manager, and 2 board members who usually agreed with whatever Randall proposed. When homeowner comments opened, I stood up. "Can someone explain why parking lines are being added to West Ridge Fire Access Road?" I asked. Randall looked at the photo, then looked at me. "They're temporary event management markings," he said. "Is the fire road still going to stay clear?" "Of course." "Then why are there parking spaces on it?" He leaned toward the microphone. "Miss Morales, the road is wider than necessary for its current use. During clubhouse functions, the HOA will use only a limited portion of the area." I said, "It's marked as emergency access. The fire lane itself will remain operational." That was the first time he said it. The fire lane itself? As if a 20-foot emergency road could be separated into a fire lane and a guest parking lane by changing the words used to describe it. I asked whether the fire department had approved the change. Randall's smile faded by half an inch. "All required agencies have been consulted." That was not an answer. After the meeting, I asked the community manager, Lisa Donnelly, whether homeowners could see the approval documents. She said she would check. 2 weeks went by. Then she emailed me a 1-page response saying the clubhouse parking plan had been reviewed in coordination with the association's development team. No fire department letter. No approved fire access plan. No permit condition. Nothing. I could have pushed harder then. I should have, but life was busy. Miguel's father had been in and out of the hospital. Camila was applying to schools. The clubhouse construction seemed endless, and I honestly believe somebody at the HOA had checked the rules. That was my mistake. I trusted people who were counting on residents not reading the plans. By early fall, the clubhouse was finished. It looked impressive. I'll give them that. Tall windows, stone walls, a shaded patio, a bar-style kitchen. The board hosted a preview night for residents, with wine, a catered dinner, and a string quartet playing near the entrance. Randall stood by the new fireplace and told everyone the clubhouse would elevate the value and prestige of Canyon Crest for decades. Behind the building, the fire road was full of cars. Not just a few. Full. The HOA had installed a dark metal gate at the road entrance, then placed a keypad box beside it. Above the gate was a sign that said, "Clubhouse Event Access." Beyond it, the red curb had been painted over in places. The angled spaces now ran in 2 neat rows along the emergency route. Each parking stall had a concrete wheel stop. 28 wheel stops in total. 28 heavy concrete blocks bolted directly into pavement that had once been kept completely clear for emergency vehicles. I walked through the lot that night and measured the remaining travel lane with a tape measure from Miguel's truck. At its narrowest point, between a parked SUV and the concrete wheel stops, it was just under 11 feet. A standard fire engine needs more than that. A large brush truck needs more than that. Even if a fire vehicle could squeeze through, it could not safely maneuver around a row of parked cars on a curved hillside road. I took video. Slowly, no yelling, no confrontation. I filmed the gate, the keypad, The signs, the wheel stops, the parked SUVs, and the bottleneck near the clubhouse wall. Then I went home and opened the development documents. That was when I found the first thing that made my stomach drop. The clubhouse renovation permit included a fire safety sheet. It showed the West Ridge Fire Access Road as a 20-foot unobstructed route from the clubhouse gate to the upper connection road. The words were clear. Unobstructed fire apparatus access. Not unobstructed except for weddings. Not unobstructed when somebody remembers to move the cars. Unobstructed. I sent the drawing to Lisa Donnelly and asked for clarification. Her reply came the next morning. Anna, the parking layout is a board-approved operational feature. Emergency access remains available as needed. I read that sentence 3 times. Available as needed. What did that even mean? Would a firefighter call the HOA before coming through? Would someone text 28 guests and ask them to move their cars while a hillside burned? Would Randall Voss stand at the keypad with a clipboard and decide when the access was needed? I sent one more email. Please provide the written approval from the fire department or fire marshal, allowing parking and fixed wheel stops on this emergency route. Lisa did not respond. A week later, the first Santa Ana wind warning of the season arrived. The weather report said gusts could reach 60 miles per hour in the foothills. The air went dry. The hills turned brittle. Everyone started checking the wildfire maps again. That Friday, the clubhouse hosted a private charity dinner. At 6:18 that evening, someone reported smoke near the canyon below the West Ridge. Atshase, doozech shishase. The first evacuation alert hit our phones. And at 6:31, the West Ridge Fire Access Road became the most important piece of pavement in Canyon Crest Estates. It was also nearly blocked solid. I was coming home from picking up Camila from a study group when I saw the smoke over the hillside. Miguel was already at home. He had packed documents, medication, water, and the dog's leash. By the time I got through the front door, we could hear helicopters in the distance. Then somebody started pounding on our door. It was our neighbor, Tom Bishop, pale and breathing hard. Fire trucks are trying to get through the clubhouse road, he said. Cars are blocking it. Miguel and I ran down toward the clubhouse. The scene at the gate was chaos. Guests from the dinner were spilling out into the parking area, holding purses, jackets, phones, and half-finished drinks. A man in a tuxedo was arguing with a firefighter because his SUV was boxed in by other cars. A woman kept asking whether she could drive back toward the main entrance, even though the road was already filling with residents leaving the community. Behind them, the brush engine sat at the narrow point, lights flashing against the clubhouse walls. The driver had stopped because the road was too tight. A firefighter was shouting, "Move the vehicles now, we need the lane clear." Randall Voss stood near the gate, still wearing his event jacket. He kept saying, "They're moving them. They're moving them." But people were not moving fast enough. Some were looking for keys. Some had been drinking and were trying to find friends to drive. Some had parked so close together that one vehicle could not leave until another backed out. And the fire was still burning below the ridge. The fire did not destroy our homes that night. The wind shifted. Crews attacked it from another access point. Helicopters dropped water. The fire was contained before it crossed the lower service road, but it came close enough that every person in Canyon Crest saw what Randall had treated as a design inconvenience. The road was not extra space. It was not guest parking. It was not a luxury amenity. It was the route emergency crews were supposed to have when the main entrance became crowded, smoky, or unusable. The next morning, while the ash was still sitting on our cars, Randall sent an email to the neighborhood. He wrote that the HOA had successfully coordinated emergency movement during an unprecedented situation. Then he wrote that the parking setup would be reviewed to improve future event logistics. He never used the words fire road. He never mentioned the 11-foot bottleneck. He never acknowledged that the engine had been blocked. That was when I called Anna's neighborhood justice into action, not because I wanted to embarrass the board, but because I knew the next fire might not turn away from our homes. And this time, I wasn't going to let them hide behind a vague email. The first thing I did was not call the police. A blocked emergency road during a real fight. But property management decisions and code violations do not always work that way. The firefighters had a fire to fight. Their job that night was protecting people and homes, not standing in the clubhouse parking lot, debating the HOA's site plan. The second thing I did was not threaten to sue. A lawsuit over access, permits, and safety rules could take months or years. It would cost more than most homeowners could afford. And more importantly, it would not clear the road before the next wind event. What I needed was the one person who could say whether the road was legally allowed to be blocked, the fire marshal. But before I called, I wanted evidence strong enough that nobody could dismiss it as one angry resident complaining about parking. So I built a file. I pulled my phone videos from the clubhouse preview night and the fire evening. I took screenshots that showed the time and date. I saved the neighborhood evacuation alert. I saved Randall's email. I printed the fire safety sheet from the renovation permit. Then I started looking for older records. Canyon Crest had a resident portal full of meeting minutes, budgets, notices, and about 1,000 documents nobody ever read. The useful records were not in the obvious places. They were buried in a planning archive from when the community was first approved. I found a scanned copy of the original tract map. It showed Westridge Fire Access Road as a 24-foot paved emergency route. A note along the edge said that it was to remain clear for fire apparatus at all times and could not be altered without approval from the local fire authority. I found an environmental review map from the 1990s. It identified our western ridge as a high fire hazard interface zone. I found a planning condition sheet for the original developer. One condition required 2 points of emergency access for the western homes because the terrain and brush conditions could make a single route unsafe during an evacuation. Then I found the most useful document of all. It was a fire access diagram submitted as part of the clubhouse renovation package 18 months earlier. The diagram showed the new building, patio, gate, and parking improvements. A bright red line ran right through the area where the HOA had placed its guest spaces. The legend identified it as required fire apparatus access. The line was 20 feet wide. The actual open space between parked vehicles was less than 11. Anna came over to my house the following Saturday. She spread the maps across my dining table and asked me to walk through the fire night from the beginning. Not the emotional version. The exact version. What time did I see smoke? When did the alert arrive? When did I record video? Where was the brush engine stopped? How many vehicles were parked there? Could I identify which obstructions were temporary and which were fixed? That last question mattered. Cars can move. Eventually, concrete wheel stops, a locked ornamental gate, reserved parking signs, and a keypad designed for guests do not move on their own. I showed her the video. At chasse, patruzeci și trei. M. The camera panned across 9 SUVs, 3 sedans, and a pickup truck. At chasse, patruzeci și cinci. Nobrezera masi. M. It showed a fire engine stopped behind a dark blue Range Rover parked within the marked spaces. At chasse, patruzeci și șapte. M. The camera caught a firefighter, pointing at the concrete wheel stops and telling somebody, "We need this whole lane open." Anna paused the video. "Look at that," she said. Near the gate was a red and white sign I had missed before. It said, "Fire lane, no parking." The HOA had installed guest spaces directly beneath a fire lane sign, not near it, not beside it, beneath it. Anna said, "That gives us a clean question for the fire marshal. Did they approve a parking plan that physically conflicts with a designated fire lane?" I asked, "What if Randall says the cars were there only because of the event?" She pointed to the wheel stops. Then he has to explain why he installed 28 fixed parking controls on an emergency route. The next week, I filed a formal complaint with the Los Angeles County Fire Department's Fire Prevention Office. I did not exaggerate. I did not say homes had burned when they had not to. I described the actual situation: a brush fire, an emergency route partially blocked by guest parking, a fire apparatus bottleneck, fixed barriers, and permit documents showing a required unobstructed access road. I attached everything. The original fire road map, the clubhouse permit sheet, the time-stamped video, photos taken the next morning of the painted parking stalls, screenshots of public satellite imagery from before and after the clubhouse renovation. The satellite images were especially helpful. The older image showed a clear, open strip behind the clubhouse. The newer one showed the gate, the new paved layout, and rows of vehicles on the route during a weekend event. Anna had found the historic imagery feature and made sure the dates were visible. Photos show what happened, she told me. Time-stamped images show it wasn't a one-night mistake. The HOA received notice of the complaint 4 business days later. Randall called me that afternoon. He did not sound like a man worried about a safety issue. He sounded like a man angry that someone had created paperwork he could not control. "Anna," he said, "I'm told you've made a report to the fire department. I submitted the fire road documents and the video from the brush fire. You made a report based on a temporary parking situation. You installed permanent parking controls. That is not what they are. They're bolted into the pavement. They can be removed if necessary." "By whom?" He paused. "Maintenance." "During a fire?" "Anna, you are turning an operational issue into a legal crusade." I looked through my front window toward the ridge. "Randall, a fire engine could not pass. That isn't operational. That's the whole issue." His voice hardened. The fire department did get access. After guests moved cars, they were moving cars because firefighters told them to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You have no idea how much the HOA has invested in this clubhouse." That was probably true. But investment did not make a blocked emergency road safer. I said, "Then you should have protected the road before you spent the money." He hung up. The board called an emergency meeting 2 nights later. They scheduled it for a Monday at 5:30 p.m., which was usually how they made sure working residents could not attend. But after the brush fire, people showed up anyway. More than 60 homeowners crowded into the clubhouse event room, which still smelled like fresh paint and catered food. Randall opened the meeting by saying the board took resident safety extremely seriously. Then he said the fire road had never been formally closed. That was technically true. It had not been formally closed. It had just been blocked by parking stalls, wheel stops, a locked gate, and guest vehicles. Tom Bishop stood up and asked, "Can a fire engine get through it right now?" Randall said, "In an emergency, staff would clear the area." Tom said, "How fast?" Randall looked at Lisa Donnelly. Lisa said, "We would follow the emergency event protocol." Tom asked, "What is the protocol?" Nobody answered. I stood up next. I placed copies of the fire access diagram on the table in front of the board. "This is the approved renovation fire plan." I said, "It shows a 20-foot unobstructed access route. The road is currently less than 11 feet wide in places when guest parking is occupied. Has the fire marshal approved that?" Randall looked at the page but did not touch it. "Our consultants have addressed all relevant requirements." "That's not my question. The board is not going to litigate technical documents in a public comment period." A woman in the back said, "Then why did you spend our dues on guest parking in a fire lane?" The room got loud. Randall tried to call for order. He said the parking had been essential because the clubhouse's main lot only held 34 cars. While larger events could bring more than 100 guests, there it was. The real reason: they had approved a clubhouse designed for large functions without enough legal parking. Rather than reduce the size of events or build a proper lot somewhere allowed, they converted the one emergency road that gave the Western Ridge a second escape route. The board had not misunderstood the fire road. They had chosen to gamble with it. Randall defended the decision by saying the community needed event revenue. The clubhouse rental plan was projected to bring in more than $96,000 a year. The money, he said, would offset rising landscaping and insurance costs. That was also why he would not back down. The parking spaces were not just spaces. They were part of his business model. Without them, the clubhouse could not host the large paid events that made the numbers work. The fire marshal's office contacted me the following week. An inspector named Captain Joel Barrows said he had reviewed the complaint and would conduct a site inspection. He did not promise an outcome. He did not tell me what action would be taken. He only asked that the access route be left in its normal condition during the inspection. That phrase made me nervous. Normale condition? The HOA could have cleared the cars and removed portable signs for one morning, then claimed the problem had been fixed. So Anna and I kept documenting. We recorded every weekend event from public areas. We filmed SUVs entering through the clubhouse gate. We photographed the reserved parking signs. We recorded the road width with a measuring tape and a visible ruler. We captured a delivery truck trying to turn around because it could not pass the parked cars. We saved the clubhouse rental calendar, which listed private events nearly every Saturday for the next 2 months. And then, just 3 days before Captain Barrows was scheduled to inspect, we found something that changed the entire case. A former HOA maintenance employee named Victor Ramos contacted me. Victor had worked for Canyon Crest for 6 years. He had left the previous spring after a dispute over unpaid overtime, but he did not call because he wanted revenge. He called because he had seen our meeting discussion online. He said, "I know why the gate is there." We met him at a coffee shop in Valencia. Victor brought a folder. Inside were work orders from the clubhouse project. One work order directed the maintenance crew to remove old red curb markings near the gate and install new parking signs per board president instruction. Another ordered the purchase of 28 concrete wheel stops. A third described the gate system as guest event access control. But the final document was the one that mattered most. It was an email printed from the HOA maintenance account. Randall had written it to Lisa and the clubhouse contractor months before the renovation was complete. The email said, "We need the west route to function as overflow parking before the grand opening. Do not invite fire prevention into the discussion until the layout is operational." Victor said he had kept the copy because he had been worried about the road from the beginning. I read the line again. Do not invite fire prevention into the discussion. That was the moment we stopped asking whether the HOA had made an innocent mistake. Randall knew the road was fire access. He knew fire prevention might object, and he chose to finish the parking layout before anyone could stop him. Captain Barrows was no longer walking into a routine complaint. He was walking into evidence that the HOA had deliberately kept the fire authority out of a decision involving emergency access. And if you enjoy stories where one overlooked email changes everything, subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice. Because sometimes the proof is not in what people say at the meeting, it's in what they told their staff not to say. Captain Joel Barrows arrived on a Thursday morning at 8:15. The HOA had cleared the road before he got there. Of course they had no guest cars, no party signs, no people in cocktail dresses carrying wine glasses. The gate was open. The road looked wider than it had during every event I had documented. But the permanent problem was still there. The concrete wheel stops were still bolted down. The painted parking stalls were still visible. The reserved parking signs were still mounted to metal posts. And the gate infrastructure still narrowed the entrance to the emergency route. Captain Barrows walked the road slowly with a measuring wheel. He had 2 inspectors with him, along with Lisa Donnelly, Randall Voss, and the HOA's new attorney. Randall had clearly prepared for this. He wore a navy blazer and carried a thick binder. He greeted the captain warmly and described the road as a multi-use service corridor with emergency capability. Captain Barrows stopped walking. He looked at Randall. "Is this road designated fire apparatus access on the approved plans?" Randall said, "It serves several functions." "That wasn't my question." Randall glanced at the attorney. Then he said, "Yes, it is shown as fire access." Captain Barrows nodded. "Then it must remain usable as fire apparatus access." Randall replied, "It does." The captain looked at the wheel stops. "Why are these here?" "To organize limited guest parking during clubhouse functions." "Are those spaces within the required access width?" Randall hesitated. "They are adjacent to the travel path." Captain Barrows pulled out the approved fire access plan. The red line was 20 feet wide. The marked spaces occupied more than half of it. He measured the narrowest point between the wheel stops and the clubhouse side curb. 10 feet. 8 inches. The captain wrote it down. Then he walked to the gate. The ornamental gate had 2 swinging arms. When fully open, they left a clear opening narrower than the required fire access width. There was also a keypad pedestal standing on a raised concrete base near the center line. Captain Barrows measured that too. He asked Lisa whether the gate was connected to the fire department's emergency access system. Lisa said she was not sure. Randall stepped in. The gate can be opened manually. By whom? Ho staff. Are staff on site at all times? No. Do responding engines carry the gate key? I believe. The captain cut him off. You either know or you don't. Randall did not know. Then Captain Barrows asked the question nobody on the board wanted to answer. Was this gate and parking layout submitted to fire prevention for review before installation? Randall said. The clubhouse project went through all required channels. The captain held up the email Victor had provided, now included in my complaint file. Then explain this. Randall's face changed. Not dramatically. He didn't shout. He didn't stand up. But the confidence left him. He read the email once. Then he looked at Lisa. Lisa looked at the ground. The HOA attorney asked to speak privately with Randall. They stepped away for several minutes while the inspectors continued taking photos. Captain Barrows eventually called everyone back together. He explained that the fire access route had been altered in ways that conflicted with the approved fire safety plan. Fixed obstructions, guest parking operations, a non-compliant gate opening, and the lack of approved fire department access all created serious concerns. Then he issued a notice of violation. The order required the HOA to do 4 things. First, remove the concrete wheel stops, parking signs, and painted guest parking layout from the required fire access width. Second, remove or modify the gate and keypad system so the route provided the required clear width and emergency access. Third, restore the road surface, striping, and signage to an approved fire lane configuration. Fourth, submit a corrected fire access plan and pass reinspection before the clubhouse could receive its final operational approval. That last part landed hardest. The clubhouse had been hosting preview events, member dinners, and private gatherings under temporary arrangements, but it had not yet received the final certificate of occupancy for the expanded event use Randall had been promising. Without final fire clearance, it could not legally host the large paid events that made the project profitable. No weddings, no corporate mixers, no charity galas, no private rentals, no projected $96. Zero pouce event revenue. The board had turned a fire road into parking to make the clubhouse work. Now, the fire marshal had stopped the clubhouse from operating until the fire road worked again. Randall tried to argue that the order was excessive. He said the fire had been contained. He said no homes had burned. He said the event guests had moved their vehicles. Captain Barrows listened without interrupting. Then he said, "The standard is not whether you got lucky once. The standard is whether emergency apparatus can access the route when it needs to." That was the whole case in one sentence. You do not wait for a house to burn down before you admit the fire road needed to be open. The HOA had 30 days to submit a correction plan and 60 days to complete the physical work. Until then, the clubhouse could be used only for limited administrative activity, not for events that increased occupancy and parking demand. The board's first response was denial. Randall sent an email to the neighborhood saying the violation involved technical fire access modifications and that the HOA was working cooperatively with county officials. He did not mention the blocked engine. He did not mention the email telling staff to keep fire prevention out of the discussion. He did not mention the fact that the clubhouse could not operate as promised. But homeowners had seen the documents by then. They had seen my videos. They had seen the original Red Line fire plan. They had seen the fire marshal's order. And once people understand that an HOA treated an emergency route as a source of rental income, it becomes very hard to calm them down with polished wording. The next board meeting was packed. Randall tried to limit comments to 2 minutes. Nobody cared. A retired firefighter named George Hanley stood up first. He had lived in Canyon Crest for 14 years. He held the notice of violation in one hand and said, "You didn't make a parking mistake. You created a delay point on the only secondary emergency route for half this community." A mother from the West Ridge said she had spent the brush fire night trying to decide whether to evacuate through the main entrance or wait for the road to clear. Another homeowner asked how much money had been spent on the parking layout. The treasurer finally answered, "The gate, keypad, signage, wheel stops, striping, concrete work, and landscaping modifications had cost $72. CBay. Then somebody asked how much it would cost to remove everything. The answer was worse. The board had received estimates between $48,000 and $61,000 to remove the wheel stops and gate, repave damaged sections, restore markings, replace drainage at the entrance, and add approved emergency access equipment. That did not include legal fees. It did not include the lost clubhouse revenue. It did not include the cost of reworking the event rental business model after losing the guest spaces. Randall tried to defend the project by saying the money had been spent to protect HOA finances. A woman near the back said, "You protected the budget by gambling with our evacuation route?" The room went silent. Randall resigned as president 2 weeks later. He stayed on the board briefly, but the members voted him out at the next special election. Lisa Donnelly was replaced as community manager after an outside management review found that she had received multiple written warnings about the fire road concerns and had never escalated them to the county. The new board president was Carla Wynn, an engineer who had opposed the parking plan from the beginning but had been outvoted. Her first action was to post the entire fire marshal order on the resident portal. Her second was to hire a fire access consultant approved by the county. And her third was to cancel every clubhouse event until the route was restored. The correction work began in late November. Workers unbolted 28 concrete wheel stops from the pavement. They removed the reserved parking signs. They ground off the white stall lines. They demolished the raised keypad pedestal. They removed the gate arms and widened the entrance. The HOA installed compliant emergency signage, reflective fire lane striping, and a county-approved emergency gate system that could be accessed by responding fire crews without waiting for an HOA employee. The road was restored to a clear width of 20 feet for its entire length. No parking, no storage, no decorative planters, no temporary event spaces. Just a clear emergency route through the foothills. It took nearly 4 months before the fire marshal signed off on the corrected access plan. The clubhouse finally received its operational approval after the road passed re-inspection, but by then the damage to the HOA's finances was clear. The canceled rentals cost the association more than $39. 0 inches expected revenue. The removal, restoration, consultant work, legal review, and county compliance fees pushed the total loss beyond $128. Ling, ling, ling. All because the board wanted guests to park closer to a party. The part that stayed with me happened the following spring. A vegetation fire started again in the canyon below the West Ridge. Smaller than the first one, but close enough that everyone took it seriously. This time, the fire engines came through West Ridge Fire Access Road without stopping. The gate opened. The road was clear. The trucks passed the clubhouse in seconds and moved toward the ridge. No guests looking for keys. No SUV trapped behind another SUV. No HOA president explaining why safety could wait until after the event ended. Just emergency crews using an emergency road exactly as it had been designed to be used. Miguel stood beside me at the edge of our street and watched the trucks disappear around the bend. He said, "That's the first time I've ever been happy to see an empty road." I knew what he meant. Most people never think about a fire road when nothing is burning. It looks like wasted space. Pavement nobody drives on. A gate nobody uses. A route that feels unnecessary right up until the moment it is the only thing standing between a neighborhood and disaster. Randall treated that road like an inconvenience because he measured its value by how often it made money. The fire marshal measured it by what could happen when people needed it most. That was the difference. I didn't call the fire marshal to punish the HOA. I called because the next brush fire might not shift with the wind. And when the fire trucks needed that road, I wanted it empty, not profitable. Empty. If your HOA converted a fire lane into guest parking and promised to move the cars when needed, would you trust that promise? Some people may think event parking is a minor inconvenience. Others will say emergency access should never be negotiable, no matter how much revenue a clubhouse can bring in. Tell me where you draw the line in the comments. And if you believe the right document, video, or inspection can protect a neighborhood before something irreversible happens. Subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice. Around here, the rules that matter most are the ones people notice before it is too late. This video is a fictionalized, dramatized storytelling narrative based on real-life HOA, fire safety, property, and community conflict themes. Names, characters, locations, documents, events, and outcomes may be invented, reconstructed, or changed for entertainment. Visuals may be generated using AI or other digital tools. This content is not legal, financial, real estate, or professional advice. Laws, fire codes, HOA rules, and local regulations vary. Consult a qualified professional about your own situation